Thank you very much, Joe. And let me say it is such a great pleasure to come here to the Colorado Foothills World Affairs Council. You know, I live in Florida and in Rhode Island, and I know you call yourselves the Foothills, but to those of us in Rhode Island, you look like the Himalayas. I mean, it's extraordinary how much you have to climb to get up here. Truly, it's been Joe with a very important correction, 5-time. I do like that number, but my last assignment was in a place called Serbia, in Republic of Serbia. I was kind of surprised because I sort of began my career in the Balkans. So, you know, when you get a call from the president, and I remember I was traveling out to Colorado. This was in the summer of 21, I guess, and we stopped for gas. So I was pumping gas in Nebraska, and the phone rings. It was the White House asking if I wanted to go to Serbia, and it wasn't on my list. I'd been there, done that, but you know, I mean, you don't say things like, "Gee, do you have it in a bigger size or something?" So what you do if you ever get a call from the president says, "You bet, I would like to do that," and I'm very, very glad I did. I was really one of the best experiences I've had in the Foreign Service. You know, it's always fun to be in a situation where, you know, everyone's got certain expectations, and your job is to show how wrong they are and kind of bring them around, and there's no better opportunity to do that than in a country that we had some 20-something years before bombed. So I was very, it was a great honor to do that, and I'll get into some of the details because I think they do have sort of broader ramifications. Before I start, I always and forgive me if anyone's heard this story before, I always quote this Polish party first secretary from the 1950s, 60s, before our time, and you know, a name otherwise lost to history, Władysław Gomułka. I'll test you at the end of the evening whether you remember Władysław Gomułka. He was known for very long speeches and very unsuccessful metaphors. And one day he stood up in front of a crowd in southern Poland in the city of Krakow, and he said, "Comrades, just a few years ago, our fatherland stood on the very edge of a deep abyss. And I'm here to tell you today, comrades, we have taken an important step forward." I think we might want to keep in mind the wise words of Władysław Gomułka and not take that important step forward. You know, I didn't climb all the way up to the foothills to tell you that everything's going well. I know it's a family time group, so I'm just going to say everything's going to a lot of problems right now. And so I think we all ought to be honest about that, and we ought to be clear where we are. But I think it's also important to be clear where we want to go. Because, you know, I don't need to tell anyone here, this is one heck of a country. And, you know, we should not allow people to kind of tear it down, to say we're either too good for the world or too bad for the world. And frankly speaking, the world needs us. And I'll go into some details on that. You know, there is, strangely speaking, there is this kind of sense among Americans that somehow we have been victimized by the world. You know, that we have done all this stuff for the world, and the world doesn't even say thank you to us. And that is such a complete misreading of our role in the world, why we play this role in the world, and why we must get back on track and play this role again. If you think back to the institutions that were formed after World War II, What were we trying to do? And I say we because it was the United States. Without the U.S., there would have been no meeting in San Francisco. Without the meeting in San Francisco, there'd be no UN. Have you ever thought why the UN, the first three words of the UN Charter begin with "we the people"? Think it through. It was our idea, and it was a damn good idea. And basically, we were in a position to get the world back on its feet, to try to, with a combination of great idealism, but also a practical spirit, because you can't just have a General Assembly, because no one would make a decision there. You needed some kind of security council. You needed a capacity to kind of move forward. So we selected basically the victorious powers after World War II. Not an ideal situation, because even today, why is Japan not on the Security Council? Why is India not on the Security Council? There are issues. There are issues that need to be addressed. But we created an institution that, frankly, has served our interests. The UN deploys troops, peacekeepers all over the world. We have them, in all kinds of places in the Middle East. We've had them in the Balkans, where I spent a lot of time. We've had them in Asia. We've had them all over the place. Not all of them have involved U.S. troops. We've managed to have a situation where U.S. troops went to a small minority of these deployments. So. Yet we had tremendous influence on getting this done. So people who say, oh, we should get out of the UN, it's some kind of entangling relationships, and by gosh, we don't need all these little countries to take advantage of it. It's completely untrue. We used the UN for our own interests, and those were very good interests. We helped rebuild the post-war period. It wasn't just the UN. Do you know why there's a World Bank in the world? Do you know why there's an International Monetary Fund in the world? We did it. And so you get people today saying, well, what's this World Bank? They just go around helping countries that we really don't care about. Oh, yes, we do. And to have an international organization where so many other countries are part and parcel of it and helping countries that we can't handle on our own, this is not something that has kind of constrained us and held our hands back. These are organizations that have extended our reach, not diminished our reach. Have you ever thought about some of these regional security organizations? It was a tough time back in the 1950s. You had this whole communist movement in the 1950s. We needed to make sure countries were organized to deal with this, to withstand this. And I would say the most famous of these and the most successful of these was in the place that was most threatened right after World War II. And that was in creating the North Atlantic Treaty Organization at, guess where? Washington. The Treaty of Washington created this. That basically said to the Soviets, that said to everybody that the U.S. would remain a part of European security. It made very clear that the U.S. would never allow a situation where we would have to return to Europe on landing craft in a beach in Normandy. We would be always a part of European security. Why would we be a part of European security? Is because we're so altruistic about Europe? No, because we understood it's part and parcel of our security. And yet today you have people saying, why in the world are we in NATO? After all, aren't we paying more military expenditures than all the Europeans? Frankly, Europe has done a lot. Europe has done a lot. They may have reduced some of their expenditures in the 1990s. They've since raised them, by the way. Why did they reduce them in the 1990s? Because countries like Germany, these countries reached out to these countries that had just come out from under or come out from behind the Iron Curtain to make sure these countries were successful. Is it in our interest that Poland is successful? You bet it is. Was it in our interest that Germany and all these other European states did more for Poland than we did for Poland? Yes, it helped us a lot. So we helped bring these countries along. Poland has become a tremendous NATO ally. When I served in Poland, they bought, they had all these old Soviet aircraft. They got rid of all their MiG-29s, and they bought, guess what, F-16s, 46 of them. Why did they buy F-16s? Because if we're ever faced with another security crisis, we want to fly with America, we want to fly on American, and we want to make sure that that the U.S. understands they have reliable friends and partners in Europe. That has been the whole idea. And yet, strangely enough, as the decades wear by, you hear so many Americans saying, we have done so much for the world, and the world has done so little for us. A completely warped concept of what international leadership meant. And it is true, the international leadership, it's a burden. And I must say, you know, I'm from Little Compton, Rhode Island. That's the smallest town in the smallest state. No one ever got up in the morning in Little Compton, Rhode Island and said, I want to dominate the world. Nobody. It didn't occur to us, but you know, there's something in life called responsibilities, and we understood the responsibility, and we pursued those responsibilities with a vision that we were always going to be in the driver's seat. We were always going to be in a position to make sure that if there was a threat to security, we were going to be in the center of it. And yet Americans think this is somehow an unfair allocation of resources. So you heard, you know, back in about 10 years ago, I think it took place in Wales, Janet, Wales, and the NATO conference was to say to all the NATO partners, this was during the Obama administration, and the line from us was, Europeans, no peace dividend anymore. Everyone's got to do at least 2%. 2% of your GDP should go into the military. And basically most of the Europeans have done that. We have a few laggards, but we're working on them. And then what happened just last year? Last year, many of the European partners have increased their expenditures so much, they're at about 3.5%. And you think, my God, they took this to heart. They understand what we're talking about. Actually, the motivation is kind of frightening. The motivation in 2014 was, we want to pay more to keep the Americans in Europe, to keep you at our side as we face issues. Today, it's we want to pay more because we're kind of wondering whether the Americans are going to be with us. And I think it's important to understand in international relations, you know, it's fine to have surprise birthday parties. I mean, I don't like them, but some people do. It's not good to have a surprise where you don't know whether your partner is going to be with you or not with you. And we're getting a little too much of that these days. We're getting Americans talking about, well, should we help Europe? Well, it kind of depends on whether Europe has done enough to help itself. It kind of depends on what other things we have going on. Depends on a lot of stuff, and the overall effect of this is for Europeans to get very worried that maybe we're not going to be with them. I would argue to you that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the North Atlantic Alliance, has been absolutely fundamental to our well-being. The fact that we have been able to grow faster than almost every country in the world, that we have been successful, that we are the biggest investor all over the world, has to do with the fact that we have given security in Europe and, frankly, security in a lot of Asian places as well. We need to understand that has been in our interests. So I think Americans need to, there's a lot of feeling that we've been chumps, we've somehow allowed ourselves to be manipulated by people, and this is the worst part, you hear among people who wave the American flag every minute that somehow we're in decline, and we're not. It really is amazing. I mean, anyone who's been, you know, I've had the honor of being an American ambassador 5 times, thanks Joe, but you know, you walked into a room and you know, it would go into this hush because they want to know what you think. And that, you know, I don't think that's such a bad situation, that the world kind of waits for what we have to say. And so if there's some really bad idea, and there are a lot of bad ideas these days, if the Americans played it well, if we worked with others, we could just, without yelling at anybody, without you know, threatening anybody, we could say, no, we don't think that's the direction we should go. You wouldn't believe the support we would get. So my first point is, let's all knock this off and understand that not only is this a great country, we can do even more in the future, provided we understand that friends and allies and partners are just that. We need them, they need us, so let's try to do a better job of working together. There are some enormous challenges, no more so than Ukraine. Why is Ukraine so important? Is it we just love Ukrainians? We do, but that's not the point. The point is, as a Polish foreign minister once said to me, without Ukraine, we're dealing with Russia. With Ukraine, when Russia and Ukraine are together, we're dealing with the Soviet Union. Do we really want that back? Is that really something we think we can live with? I would argue no. I think we need to understand that to have a Soviet Union that is an existential threat to us, we don't want that. And we need to make sure that when we say what they're trying to do in Ukraine won't stand, that we really mean it and we pull together allies, and we've been doing that. And, you know, I mean, one time I was in this little country. It was my first ambassadorship, and I was trying to get the prime minister to do something he didn't want to do, and he kind of was complaining about it. And then he said, you know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a lot of grief in my parliament tomorrow, but you know why I'm going to do it? Because whatever grief I'm going to get in the parliament, I know that the best thing I can do for my country is to be a good friend and ally of the U.S., so I'm going to do it. That's pure respect. And we need to get back to earning that respect from people. So when I went to Serbia in March 22, and we had bombed Serbia over an issue of Kosovo. And you know, the historians, there are a lot of opinions that differ on it, whether it was a good idea, whether it was a bad idea. You know, historians look back, lawyers look back. As diplomats, we really ought to do our best to look forward. And so I looked at the situation in Serbia and I thought, well, I don't think they're going to be ready to do what we want to do with Kosovo, to recognize Kosovo. So we're going to kind of go for a normalization between Serbia and Kosovo, and to try to understand that what we will not tolerate is any armed action from one against the other. And generally that's held, but it's a modest goal. Then my other task was to look at whether I could make Serbia a democracy, whether I could turn the president into Thomas Jefferson. Well, ultimately, democracies, they're made at home. And you know, if a country is going to be a democracy, it's because their people want it to be a democracy. You can recommend it all you want. They've got to make the tough calls. They've got to have the free and fair elections. So ultimately, it's really not for the American ambassador to wag his finger and say you need to be a democracy and expect somebody to bang the side of his head with the palm of his hand and say, you know, I never thought of that, but you're right, we should be a democracy. So what was the third issue? And what I thought with Serbia, small country that it is, but largest country in the Balkans, and a country that has a lot of Russian influence, sadly, a lot of Russian influence, and that's to some extent the legacy of the NATO bombing against Serbia in 1999. So I worked on getting Serbia to understand that their interests are the same as our interests, which is to help Ukraine. And so Serbia had some munitions. It was pretty similar to what the Ukrainians need, because the Ukrainians have old Soviet equipment. Serbia has a lot of old Soviet equipment. They were producing 155 artillery shells, 122 grads, 120 millimeter heavy mortars. I sound like an arms merchant, and I was becoming one to some extent. And so finally I got the president to just give to the Ukrainians, the president of Serbia, just give a few munitions to Ukraine. Not a lot, but as anyone in the fundraising business knows, you start people with a little, and then you try to go in for more. And who's with fundraising here? You know the deal. So before you know it, so we had American people who would test the weapons, test these munitions, put them on trucks and get them to Ukraine. And they looked at this stuff from Serbia and they said, this is pretty good. Do you have any more? Serbs said, sure, we have more. And so before you know it, we began to work with Serbia on getting Serbia to provide more to Ukraine. And so now we're on the order of magnitude of over $2 billion of munitions to Ukraine is coming from Serbia. And so then I said to Vučić, the president there, and this isn't a good thing I was there story. This is just basic diplomacy that I'm proud of American diplomats for doing. And I said to him, you know, you don't want to just be providing munitions because there are a lot of cynics out there who say, oh, Serbs are just trying to make some profit on this. So can you go meet Zelensky? So there was a conference in Moldova being held by the European Union. So Vučić went to the conference and he met Zelensky and they had a talk together. And he came back to Belgrade and he said to me, I never understood what he was doing. I never had any confidence in him, but now I see he has both a strategic understanding of where his country is, and he also understands the facts on the ground, and I'm impressed. So then there was a conference in Athens. The Greeks were having something, and Vučić was seated across from Zelensky. They were way to the left of the salt and pepper shakers at this EU meeting. And then they found themselves rolling their eyes at about the same time, and so they got together the next day, 4 and 4, and Vučić and Zelensky talked, and Vučić said, I'm going to send my wife to Kyiv for that meeting you're having on orphans. So Mrs. Vučić went to Kyiv, met with Mrs. Zelensky. Within a month, within 6 months or, 4 months, Mrs. Zelensky came to Belgrade. Then they went off at one point together, met with the Pope, and Mrs. Vučić has been back to Kyiv. So when this is it's not about me or any particular American diplomat, but this all starts because we're thinking ahead. We're good at this stuff, and there's no reason why Americans should take this view, we're good at war, we're just not very good at, we're good at diplomacy. So why are we giving up something that we're very good at? You tell me, because I don't understand it for the life of me. As you know, back starting in February, there was something called the Department for the, it was called DOGE, Department of, I've even forgotten, and that must be
government efficiency.
Government efficiency, thank you. I'm not very good at irony, but anyway, we end up losing AID in this process, the Agency for International Development, and thousands of employees. Well, first of all, it was not honest to say AID is simply being changed from an independent agency to working under the U.S. Secretary of State. That is not true, because it was always under the U.S. Secretary of State. It wasn't about a reorganization. It was about trying to kill the thing. Now, anyone who's worked with AID, and I've been working with AID since I was in the Peace Corps in Africa, sometimes they do things and you go, what? Why are you having that conference? Do you really think this country really needs that conference? Is this a case of supply of certain things exceeding the demand for certain things? Have you been listening to what they want? Have we been looking to see if we can provide what they want? You have fights like this all the time. within the bureaucracy, and anyone who's not having a fight with someone, it's probably not doing his job. And so, you know, then I remember I was down in southern Serbia, and they wanted some business incubator, and you know, it cost nothing for us. I go to the aid people. I say, look, I know all the money's already been allocated, and it's too early for. And they said, no, this is a good idea. We're going to work with you on this. So you go in to see leadership. In this case, not the president that I was talking with on Ukraine, but the prime minister I was talking with about, you know, how do you get more tech people into the business? And, you know, you're not just giving them ideas, because they have ideas. You're giving them real stuff. You're getting, you know, stuff organized. And so, you know, if you want to be influential, you better have something in your pocket to offer. And it better be something that they want. And we're doing that kind of stuff. You know, I'm talking about a business incubator, but, you know, I've been in countries where there was no food. And who's going to organize that? Well, the U.S. military always steps up. If you go to the tsunami back in December 2004 in Thailand and in Burma, the U.S. military was there within a day. It was amazing, just amazing the way they went in there. And then AID was in there within a week. And before you know, we took one of the worst tragedies and were able to stop the loss of life and help these countries rebuild. I remember I went with Secretary Rice a few months later. We met with the AID people who were there on the ground just doing fabulous work. And the most, you know, you could not go 2 minutes without somebody coming up to you and thanking you. We're good at this stuff. We're good at this stuff, and it's helpful to us because, again, when you want someone to do something because it's in your interest, they're more likely to do it if they want that relationship with you. And so now we talk about transactional relationships. I don't know what people are talking about. Is that like buying a 7-Up at a 7-Eleven? I don't know. Relationships are relationships that go over and over. You do things, they do things. When we're trying to deal with, as I was doing, the problem of North Korea, George W. Bush understood we're not going to be able to do this ourselves. We need other countries to work with us, and so we worked with China. And if you think it's hard to work with China, try working against China. And that's kind of where we are. I am not going to spend 1 minute defending the Chinese. I think they have gone in the wrong direction now for over a decade. I think China has really kind of lost its way. I think there are a lot of concerns. That does not mean we shouldn't be having some serious discussions with the Chinese and making clear what we need to see and what we can do if they can see what we're doing. We understand we need this relationship with China. Whatever you think of China, we need the relationship, but we also need to understand this stuff. And this is where this transactional thinking seems to extend to the idea that, you know, every country in the world, you talk to any country in the world and they say, well, historically, et cetera. And when Americans use the term history, we usually say, that's history. And you know what that means? That means it's irrelevant. It's not irrelevant. You got to know your history. If you knew your history, you know in Europe, they had something called the Treaty of Westphalia, 1648, ended the 30 Years' War, created this concept of these sovereign states. If you know China, or know something about China, they didn't have Westphalia. They didn't have this complex interlocking of sovereign states, which eventually turned into alliances and a lot of complexity. China had something called tributary states, where neighbors to China were not necessarily equal sovereigns, not at all. So you got to understand that a legacy of 1,000 years dies hard. And if you want to work with China, you need to understand at least their history as much as they understand our history. And we're not so easy to understand either. So I'm hopeful that we will understand. that we are doomed to find a way to work together. I'm hopeful that the Chinese will understand that they cannot put themselves in a position of kissing off their major markets in the world, that China will understand that they need to look for sustainable trade relations and running these enormous surpluses, not as much with us right now, but with the rest of the world. China has an enormous trade surplus with the rest of the world, and that this is ultimately self-defeating because it'll lead to a situation where countries avoid buying from them. So this is not something that's going to happen overnight. The Chinese are not ever going to put themselves in the position of saying, you make a good point, we'll go along with you. But they need to understand that we're pretty serious and we're pretty stubborn on these points. And when you create the impression that one day you're doing one thing and the next day you're doing another thing, people kind of doubt your resolve. They may not like the first thing you've done, they may not like the second thing, so they may hang in there and hope for a third thing or a fourth thing. And there's a concern that we are not the indispensable nation, but rather the unreliable nation. And we got to get over this. You know, you wouldn't treat a neighbor like that. You wouldn't treat a contractor like that. Maybe a contractor would treat you, but that's another matter. You would understand the need for reliability. People need to say, okay, when you say something, that is what is going to happen. And so we have kind of lost this notion of reliability. People don't know where we're going to go, probably because we don't know where we're going to go. I do not understand what the U.S. policy is to Ukraine. I think there are different U.S. policies, peaceful, not so peacefully coexisting with each other. I got the impression that the Secretary the Secretary of State has a kind of a different view than the White House. They got to sort this out. I mean, government is not amateur hour. Government requires a clear understanding of what we're going to do. If someone disagrees, you don't just shout over the person. You try to take the disagreement, find out what it's about, go down the ladder of abstraction and figure out what can be done so that at the end of the day when we speak, we speak with a very clear voice. And we're not doing that right now. Our European allies, who should be our closest friends in the world, are really concerned about how reliable we are. When we go and do an ICE raid in a Korean-owned facility in Georgia, the U.S. state of Georgia, that is, and we arrest hundreds of Koreans, and then the Koreans take note that just 3 weeks before, their president was in the White House with comprehensive meetings, and no one in the White House told their president anything about the potential that there would be this kind of raid on a Korean-owned facility. So how would that work? Well, normally, let's say you know that our people are being prepared for a meeting or are going to have a meeting with the Koreans. So you would do something called talking points. That term has become a term of real ill repute, but actually that term is very important because when you write up a talking point, and then you get it around the bureaucracy, and maybe the Department of Commerce says, well, we don't like the way you've worded this, and then you have a little discussion, and it drives you nuts, because you say, come on, Department of Commerce, this happened last month, can't you just go along with us this time? And then you have this argument, and you finally get something that everyone agrees with. And so finally, one would think that when these talking points finally are agreed, somebody would have said, hey, you know about that ICE plan for Georgia? We better do something to warn the Koreans about it. We better say something like, Mr. Lee, the president of Korea, we very much value Korean investments in the United States. This has meant a lot to us, and we're very pleased that this is happening. We hope we can see more of this. We want to tell you, however, President Lee, that there have been some problems where we believe that Hyundai is sending workers without the proper visas. Remember, Korea was trying to finish a factory, get the factory up and running, and they were having software problems, so they were sending in people. but they couldn't get them on work visas because it still took 4 months, even though our embassy in Seoul was trying to streamline the process. So they'd say, okay, Mr. Park, get a visitor visa, go to the States, fix that, and come back in a week and tell us that you've got it. I mean, that's what the Koreans were doing. And so it would be fair to say to the Koreans, you know, we know it's frustrating to get the correct visas, but you got to get the correct visas. You can't have a situation, we can't have a situation where your people are saying they're coming on visitor visas and then they're actually working on this factory. That would have been a fair warning. You didn't even have to mention ICE. You didn't have to mention that we might have to do a raid on that. Nothing, zero was said about this. And so 3 weeks later, we have this thing on the morning news about arresting Koreans, standing them up against a wall, putting those cuffs on them. And it was horrifying in Seoul, just horrifying. Because as Korea moves production facilities to the US, there's some Koreans who are very unhappy with that. And when the production facility gets moved to the US and then people get arrested, 400 of them, that's a big problem. Now, Korea has basically cast its lot with us. They've had a difficult problem with the Chinese. They brought in some American military equipment, anti-air missiles. Chinese were very upset with that. Chinese have blocked a lot of trade with Korea. Korea needs us. So when this all happened, they tried to keep the lid on it. They tried to keep it quiet. They did send a 747 over to pick up all the people who had things like B1 visas, including instead of the proper H1 visas, and get them back to Seoul and figure out how to do it. So they were dependent on us, so they kept it fairly quiet. And we were kind of lucky to get through that incident. But there will be other such incidents, and we need to understand, we need to show people some respect as we would want them to treat us. So we've got a long way to go here, but I think it begins with all of us with an understanding. I think everyone needs to look in the mirror and think, how have I regarded things? What can I do to make clear that we are a country that we are needed in the world, and frankly, we need the rest of the world. We don't need to be chanting USA to ourselves. What we do need to be doing is thinking about the importance of the world to us and all the things that we have done to help make this a more peaceful world than it would otherwise have been, to understand that friends and allies and partners are important things to have. Just as in your personal life, they're very important in the life of nations. So I'm of the view that we'll get around to it. You know, the old line about America, we always do the right thing after we've exhausted all the other possibilities. So I am of the view that we'll get there, but we need to start getting serious as a country. Thank you very much.
I've brought my phone up just for one reason, and that is that we have to get the ambassador to DIA in time for a red-eye flight to Florida. So he's going to be ushered out the door by 8:40 so that I can get him on an Uber and get him to the airport by 9:30. I wonder, while we start to field questions, if you might just inform our audience on your schedule for this week. Just this week alone?
Oh, yeah. Let me see. Last Tuesday, I was teaching at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy in Boston. Tuesday night, I got on a flight. Wednesday morning, I got to Brussels. I took part in an all-day conference, Friends of the EU, part of a European Union conference, including on the Balkans. Thursday, I went to Albania because that same book that Joe very kindly showed to you is now in Albanian language. So if you don't want to read it in English, you can get it in Albanian. And so I met with the Prime Minister of Albania, a guy named Edi Rama, and a bunch of other people. Then my friends in Macedonia heard that I was in Albania. They asked me to go to Macedonia. I did that on Saturday. Then they got me back to Albania, so that on Monday morning I got up at 3:30 in the morning, went to the airport at 4 o'clock, stood in a line that, you know, I've seen pictures of Dante's Inferno, but it was nothing compared to the lines I was in at the airport in Tirana at 4:30 in the morning. I flew out to Vienna, then to some more meetings in Brussels, then out from London to Boston. Then Tuesday morning I taught at Fletcher. Tuesday night I took a flight to get to Colorado, got here about midnight. Wednesday I'm on a bank board here, so I learned as much as I could about Colorado commercial real estate. And then on is today Thursday? Is that where? Okay, there we are. All right.
And tomorrow you will be?
Oh yeah, in a moment of weakness, and I just forgot. About 8 months ago, I agreed to speak at a group at Eckerd College in Florida at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So that's why I'm on the 11 o'clock flight. I didn't want to change it. They had already invited people. I would have appreciated a reminder, but whatever, so.
Thank you. That adds a little perspective, and sometimes I
I'm
think
keeping the
I'm busy.
weekend clear,
Yeah.
though.
Keep your weekends clear. Yeah. We'll go ahead and start in the center.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, with regard to Ukraine,
Yeah.
when Russia invaded I can't say the first time, but back during the President Obama's administration.
You mean 2014?
Yeah. My gut feeling was, at that time, I really wished that we'd sent our planes over or done something to kick them out.
Yeah.
Like, they're bullies.
In Crimea,
You treat bullies initially because you can't. They just get worse and worse, and Putin's not.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way, or is
I
it just
feel
my
that,
emotional?
first of all, I mean, let me just call a ball and strike here. I feel that the Obama administration at the time was a little too cautious about training the Ukrainian military. And we had a lot to offer Ukraine. They obviously had a tremendous interest in getting our training, learning Western systems and tactics, and we didn't do that. Going in and bombing Russians, that's kind of World War III territory. I think one ought to be careful about World War III, especially when you're talking about nuclear powers. But we never recognized the incorporation of Crimea. Crimea, by the way, was part of Ukraine since 1954 or so. It's Russian-speaking. So there are arguments, I don't share them, but there are arguments that, hey, this was probably a mistake that it was given to Ukraine in the first place. 1954 is a long time ago, and for Russia to come in and take it by force, I don't feel is acceptable, even though they went through this phony plebiscite. But the U.S. has never, since 2014, never accepted the Russian incorporation or reincorporation of Crimea, just as we never accepted the Russian incorporation of the Baltic states, Soviet incorporation of the Baltic states. So if I were to give a score to the Obama administration, I think it was a real mistake not to be much more forthcoming about training their military. And I think a robust equip and train program, which would not have been directing live fire at Russians, would have constituted part of a sort of deterrence and would have signaled to the Russians that these Ukrainians, that the West, and when the Americans do it, everyone else will do it. And that's what we have to keep in mind. If we're going to sit on the bench, don't be surprised that a lot of other countries will sit on the bench with us. So I think that was the real mistake.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very valuable and enlightening. Last week, the administration introduced its National Security Strategic Report, and it seems to do many things that have serious consequences. Among other things, it seems to embrace some of our adversaries, and it seems to rebuke and actually reject some of our allies and what they do and what they stand for. Would you please comment on that national security?
Yeah, I don't think it was so much a national security study or whatever it's called. I think it was more a doubling down on things that are already done, especially on the issue of dealing with immigration. And what it spoke to the Europeans was not about our alliance, but rather admonishing the Europeans for failing to recognize that their open border policies, by the way, they would argue vociferously that they have open borders, but that their immigration policies are resulting in changing their whole civilizations, and we're going to help them reverse that. So that's not isolationism, by the way. That's us getting involved in helping certain political parties that share our views about the need to do something about immigration. Immigration is a tough issue, and the idea that you can just stand by and not control your borders is unacceptable to most Americans, including this one. But I think to then say that we're going to go and help the Europeans with, of course, not asking them, really calls into question what kind of alliance is that. And so I think, there are a lot of models of foreign policy, but insulting people should not be one of them. And, there's an element of that which just, whenever, in the life of an individual, someone behaves in a certain way, you do want to say, why is that person acting that way? It's not helping. And that's what all the Europeans are asking right now. If there is a coming fight, if we're looking at a Russia that's going to start attacking the eastern flank, that they've probed it with drones, with attack aircraft, as they've done. If they're kind of checking to see, often when democracies are attacked, the attacker doesn't think the democracies are kind of up to the challenge of withstanding. That was certainly Hitler's view in 1939, and frankly, he was right. And it may be the Russian view right now about Europe. I think they're wrong, because if you see what's going on in Germany, there's a lot of rearmament going on. And I think if the European Union were ready, they can handle the Russians, but I don't think they would have to if they were getting clear messages from Washington that we are not going to abrogate Article 5 of the Treaty of Washington, which says an attack on one is an attack on all. So I think we're in a kind of dangerous period, and I cannot understand Putin's behavior. He seems to have taken his country off into a forest somewhere. I think we're in a dangerous period. And when there's danger, you've got to be very clear-minded and speak clearly, because I think clarity and known consequences is the way to prevent it.
Could you give us an update on the Balkans and the state of Kosovo, and how what's going on with Ukraine and Russia is affecting the Balkans?
I think the Balkans are kind of stuck in a sort of no man's land. Kosovo, for example, there's no support in Kosovo for Russia. There's no support in Albania for Russia. But Russia is busy. They have support in Serbia. They have some support in Montenegro as well. There are a lot of Russian assets there. And so I think Russia is a danger to the region there, and I think we need to be more prepared for it. Now, what is, of course, problematic is that we have not, but more importantly, the countries of the region have not developed patterns of cooperation, meaning that ever since 1878 in the Congress of Berlin, that lesson at that time was to tell Balkan countries, if you want to get something done, hook up with a great power and tattletale on your neighbor. And that's been going on ever since. And so the consequences, I think, of relations are continue to be very frayed in the region. And I think the European Union, which, as Abraham Lincoln said of his generals, the European Union has a case of the slows right now. And they're kind of not sure about further enlargement. You have to remember, in the European Union, I mean, the Commission, the European structures are in favor of it, but many of the member states have great concerns about being taxed heavily, and about, of course, the immigration issue. They did not need a pep talk from this American national security strategy. They're already worried about it. So it's unclear that Europe is really ready to step up. And they have kind of fairly asked the question to these countries, or told these countries, we love you, we don't love your problems, and you need to sort your problems out better than you have. And so I think there's a lot of frustration with dealing with these countries. Kosovo, I don't think, has done enough. They have a very nationalistic leadership. If you look at a map, it's a tiny little country in the middle of the Balkans, landlocked country. Tiny landlocked countries need to have good relations with neighbors, and they're not doing enough to develop that. And they've had a stalemate in their elections. They're hoping to have an election in 2 weeks, but for 1 year they have not had a government. And this is a country that the US and all the European partners, even the Russians, were involved in 1999. And that's a lot of international support. And I think Kosovo needs to suck it up and do more and deal with some of their problems. And, they could call Serbia war criminals all they want. My sense is, I don't know about you, but if I'm called a war criminal, I don't really like it. And it doesn't make me want to reach out and do something nice. So I think they got to knock that off. I'm sorry. There's a war crimes tribunal. In fact, I was there 3 weeks ago in The Hague, testifying of all people in favor of Hashim Thaçi, who was one of the Kosovars during the war, but I did not and do not believe he was part of war crimes, so I testified for him. The point is, there's a war crimes tribunal. We don't need one government telling another government that they're a bunch of war criminals. It's just the wrong attitude to bring to the table. So, and again, the world has much bigger problems right now than the problems of Kosovo or Serbia or these, Balkan issues. I mean, and I guess as someone who's worked on these countries a lot, I'm very aware the complexity of these issues at this point exceeds people's patience in figuring them out. And so I really think they need to get their stuff together.
Thank you.
My question is about embassy leadership.
In a particular embassy?
Well, no, in general.
Yeah.
And how does the appointment of celebrities and socialites
Yeah.
and, the like, how does that affect the role of State Department professionals, competent people like yourself, in their assignments?
As a general rule, I think you've answered your own question. You're an embassy, let's say you're a DCM, Deputy Chief of Mission. You've worked 20 years to get that position. And then along comes someone who contributed to a campaign, is now your boss. And that someone has never been into an embassy, maybe for a lost passport, but nothing beyond that. And so you're kind of sighing and saying, am I ever going to be an ambassador? That's a problem. There's no question that's a problem. And I guess the hint that it's a problem is contained in the fact that no other country does this. I think every other country understands you need real professionals. Now, that doesn't mean that every single ambassador needs to come from the ranks of the Foreign Service. It doesn't. We have many accomplished Americans who can step into an embassy, who can learn, who may have direct ties to the president, get on the phone and say, let's say they're in, Upikistan somewhere, and there's a problem, and they have a relationship with the president, with our president. They can call up and say, "Hey, I need some help here." That's an asset. But too often, they're not assets, but rather they're being rewarded for campaign contributions. So, in answer to your question, I think it's demoralizing to a lot of people in the Foreign Service, especially as the problem seems to be growing, as our campaign finance laws seem to be diminishing. And as the problem grows, I think it kind of hurts people who think, I want to go into the Foreign Service and change the world. They're never going to change the world in the from the Foreign Service, but the fact that they go in with that kind of enthusiasm is absolutely what we want.
We've got a couple of questions on this side. We'll start in the center.
Thank you. I wondered if you would opine on why you think President Trump is so seemingly infatuated with Putin, or at least manipulatable by him, and what is the payoff there to a transactional person, other than maybe a big hotel?
I don't know if I can really help you on that. I mean, I don't have any special insights from it. He seems to be someone who draws heavily on his past. If you go out into the outer boroughs around New York, there are a lot of Russian, developers and whatnot. I think he kind of feels he knows Russians better than maybe someone in Washington who hasn't dealt with them directly. I think he credits himself with a lot of instincts on on handling these people. It's something like that. I think I've seen him in these situations where he's sitting next to a foreign leader and journalists ask a tough question, and he thinks that's a bad time to ask a tough question because he's trying to get something done. I mean, I'm trying to put the best face I can on it, but I don't know the answer to your question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when I think about the current administration, it will end at some point.
Whether it will end?
It will. I know.
Okay.
I know it will. And I'm wondering, historically, Republican administrations were interested in free trade, and the Foreign Service was pretty important part of the government. And do you have an idea where all this is coming from, and what do we have to watch out for in the next election, the next administration?
That's very fair to ask. I came up in the Foreign Service a long time ago. I think Jimmy Carter was the president for the first couple of months of my, and then Ronald Reagan, then George Herbert Walker Bush. I've worked with both administrations. I never joined a political party. I just thought it was inappropriate. I have some favorites. I do. Some of them are probably not your favorites, but I got to tell you, I was dealing with North Korea, taking a lot of backstabbing on it, as if it was my idea. And I got a lot of support from our president at the time, George W. Bush. I did. And I really appreciate that to this day. So later on, I mean, I went out to Iraq, and that was not exactly Boy Scout camp. And I think there were a lot of people who thought they knew the answers. Some people were running for president on the basis of thinking they knew the answers. And I got a lot of support from our president at the time, Obama. I appreciate it, especially Biden as vice president came out there 6 times when I was there. No one else No one else came out like that, and he was out there. So I have always, my dad was a Republican, my mother was a Democrat. I did not think it amounted to this kind of divide that we've seen in this country. I always thought it was gradations of things. Democrats sometimes more worried about dislocation caused by free trade than the Republicans were worried about dislocation caused by free trade. So I never, coming up in the Foreign Service, you always felt the Republicans would be really clear on things. Sometimes the Dems were a little, hard to understand on some of this stuff. So it just didn't occur to me that what would happen has happened, which is one side believes that all the institutions of government are suspect. That's what I just cannot understand. I mean, I've never sat around, I have a lot of Foreign Service friends over the decades. I never knew who voted for whom. Right now, I don't think they're voting for, our president today. But in the past, no idea. I would say probably George Herbert Walker Bush would have done better than any other president if you took a poll within the Foreign Service. So, I don't know, I should probably throw the question back on you, because for the life of me, I don't understand it. It's excessive beyond belief to see people hyperventilating on things that they barely understand. I mean, people's opinions about things in this country are so far out of proportion to their knowledge of the issues at times. It is really worrisome. The adage of maybe if you listen more than you speak, you could learn something, that's been lost. I mean, so I don't know. I'm in my 70s. I've seen a lot. But anyone who talks cavalierly about war hasn't seen it. Is one thought I had. You hear all these people in Washington, let's go do this. Well, that's a serious means to a serious end. So it's frustrating as heck to go out and represent what I think is the greatest country in the world and then not even know who's going to be, after you or supporting you. Very frustrating.
We've got a question back here. Getting to really responsible and enlightened leadership again for the election in 2028, who do you see among the Democrats who could be balancing?
Yeah, I used to tell people, whatever country I was in, I don't interfere with your internal affairs, and it's such a bedrock principle of mine, I don't even interfere in my own country's internal affairs.
Well, I get that, and I was just going to say that you probably didn't want to answer that question, but a group that I'm with recently wrote to Hickenlooper, Bennett, and Polis is the leading politicians here in Colorado, asking them to really help get a centrist and look at the swing states and get a Democrat going and getting ready for a real possible success. And it went down to nothing. We didn't hear anything back from any of the three of them. And I just thought if I asked you, you wouldn't give me that sort of answer, but you did, so okay.
Back when Grant became president, 1876, a lot of people didn't like him for a lot of reasons. And this was at a time when Darwin's theories were just coming to light. And one wag, and typically I wouldn't remember which party he was, he said, from George Washington to Ulysses Grant, disproves Darwinian theory of the perfecting of the species. Maybe that's what's going on. I think it's rooted in, I think there are a lot of things wrong right now. I always blame social media. I blame, I blame algorithms. Let's say you order some stupid book really dumb point of view. The algorithm should be, hey, if you've read this stupid book, read this smart book because you need to understand better. But no, the algorithm gives you 4 more stupid books. So I really do believe there's something rooted in popular culture today that's causing this. I think it goes beyond bad leaders. People talk about bad leaders a lot, and there are plenty of those. But I really think there's something more fundamental about it that's pulling us apart. And I'm not sure what it is. But I do know that we need to start getting serious. And as our founders said, you know, have a decent respect for the opinions of others. And we don't seem to have that right now. So.
As I recall, aid was discontinued. And I'm not sure which administration, maybe that was by Trump. But how are other countries who received aid, how are they surviving?
First of all, our aid is pretty small. It's big in the sense that we're a big country, but in terms of the comparison to our gross national product, or our GDP rather, our gross domestic product, it's very small. So it gets around to a lot of different countries. It's often in the form of you will be trying to help a country introduce market mechanisms, so you give them some technical assistance, some people who know what they're doing. The people who know what they're doing explain how to do it. The people then do it, and it works. If it doesn't work, if it works, they may try it in another country. If it doesn't work, they go back to the drawing board. So a lot of different aid programs. But if you're talking about things like health assistance in Africa, I'm extremely worried because I think people are dying because of this. And there's just no reason for it. There is no reason in the world why the world's wealthiest country cannot put itself in the position of helping the world's poorest countries. And I think we should all be ashamed of ourselves for what has happened to especially humanitarian aid in Africa, and to ask the Swedens and the Norways to do things. And then you hear one of the arguments that I find really tiresome, and that is, well, we're very generous people, which we are, and we have many private organizations, and they are doing a lot, so why do we need this public sector organization? Why can't we do this through the more efficient private sector? Well, I tell you, I'm sorry, it has a kind of internal consistency, except it doesn't make sense. Because everyone knows that if the U.S. government is helping country X, all the NGOs see the signal that they should also be helping country X. So the U.S. government kind of puts the good housekeeping seal of approval on helping country X, whether it's to for their food sector or health or something, and everyone says, okay, that's a priority. The U.S. government has said it is. We're going to help. And so I think this is shameful, frankly speaking.
The USAID budget last year was less than 0.2%.
Less than 0.2%. I didn't know it was that much. Yeah, no, that's very small.
Something less than that.
Yeah, that's very small. I said earlier, anyone who's dealt with aid, you always have, we're always arguing about it, but we should be arguing about it. We should be saying, is that a good use of our funds? We should be doing that internally, and we do. But the notion that somehow it's some bloated institution at 0.2 or something, the idea of some bloated institution that we have to zero out, I'm sorry, it's unconscionable, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
I'm going to surmise your opinion about the current administration. So taking that aside, you go off to all these countries last week. Who are you representing?
Myself.
Okay, because I'd like to know there's someone like you out there representing.
I can't. When you're in private sector, what you try to do, I mean, when you leave this country's shores, I don't go and talk to people as I've kind of talked to fellow citizens here. But so you try to say, well, this is how they see it, And you try to, help people understand it, but, you're an American. You don't want someone to take it completely wrong. And frankly, it's like a family. You don't want to go out and tell other people what the problems are in your family. So I try to tone it down, but I'm speaking for myself. And by the way, not everyone does that, so.
Would you consider running?
That's
I feel very serious about helping my country, but I would not be a good candidate.
We have a question here, and then we'll go back to that side.
Can you please explain to us what's going on with respect to Venezuela?
From what I understand, newsflash here, it's not about drugs. It is about the fact that Maduro, in the previous Trump administration, made some promises. And he promised to take care of some problems. Some of it had to do with immigration. Probably there were some drug issues too. But if you look at a map, Venezuela is not the big drug issue. It is of interest to us in oil, but I don't really believe it's even that. I think it's simply the fact that Maduro made some promises, the most important of which was that he said he would get on a plane and leave. And he didn't do it. And he changed his mind. I don't know if the plane was actually on the runway, but he was supposed to go to Cuba, and he didn't do it. And I think a lot of what you see with this administration is things get very personal very fast. And so I think that's, to some extent, what we're seeing. And I think the issue of drugs, which, we've seen where that doesn't seem to be the top priority. And by the way, open boats 1,800 miles from the U.S., really? I think much more likely, to the extent there's drug running in Venezuela, which no doubt there is, it's going to Suriname and going to Europe. So we're kind of helping Europe on their drug problem, which they have a drug problem, and I always believe in cooperation. But so I think it's a kind of personal thing where Maduro welched on his word. And you recall, during the first Trump administration, a lot of people, Rubio working very hard on this, John Bolton, not on the scene right now, but certainly was at the time, Elliot Abrams. I mean, these are people all working for the president. They all had a deal. They thought they had a deal, and then Maduro backed out of it. I think it's something like that. Someday we'll know, but I think it's fair to say, if we're going to get a war with someone, I think there needs to be, we are a country of institutions and, norms, and, whether you believe in the War Powers Act, which is a law that has not really been tested by a number of administrations. That was a legal issue to inform the Congress. Then you look at the Constitution, Congress declares war. I think there needs to be far more consultation. Like, how about an address to the American people on what we're doing, putting our people in harm's way? Because if we put people on the ground, and I don't know that we're going to do that, but there's a lot of talk about that today, I think American people need to know about that.
We have a question waiting in the back, and then we might have time for one last question.
Yeah, we'll get back to it. Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to ask about this. So going back to when we're talking about algorithms and whatnot, so I'm kind of curious, just, with the algorithms, social media,
I don't know a lot about algorithms, I just warn you, but all right.
I guess what I'm curious about is how diplomacy can help bridge or help with the communications across borders.
Across borders?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of Americans who cross borders and they speak for themselves. Sometimes they may say, hey, our government really is serious about that. Oh, that's all fine. But I think what embassies try to do, people always make these jokes about diplomats, like, you never know what they're saying, or, it's not true. I mean, what is your prime responsibility as a diplomat? It's to speak with a clarity such that the other guy doesn't misunderstand what you're saying. I mean, my God, how else would you do it? And that, for some people, it takes some professionalism. I mean, I think it's good to have embassies out there and explaining, this is how my country is looking at this issue. And if you do this, you need to expect this kind of reaction. And I've had those conversations a lot with people to try to do the best I can to explain how we are going to react to something. Sometimes, you don't get guidance that's clear out of Washington. There's an old joke, the only thing worse than not having guidance is having guidance, but frankly, you try to, as a diplomat, you're trying to be clear. Washington will come in with a cable, you read it and goes, is this what this really means before I go in and tell the president, the local president, what Washington's saying? So you might call him up, you say, look, I don't get what I'm supposed to say here in talking point number 3. Could you explain this a little? You're trying to be very precise so that when you go in, and then after you leave the office of whatever, whether you're dealing with a foreign minister or whatever, they know precisely what the U.S. thinks. And precision is not just for engineers, it's also for diplomats.
So getting back to Venezuela, I was shocked, maybe I shouldn't have been, but I was, that the U.S. Coast Guard was involved. I thought the Coast Guard was supposed to be guarding our coasts. And I grew up around the Coast Guard, so I was really surprised that they were being used so far away from.
I'm a little surprised by that too. And
Okay.
also, Coast Guard is part of a law enforcement.
Yeah.
And law enforcement means if you have suspicions about a boat, the Coast Guard will bring the boat over, search the vessel. If there's contraband on the vessel, they'll impound the contraband and arrest the people.
The boat has to be in your waters.
Yes. But I think it is fair to say, whether you're in 3-mile or 12-mile waters, this kind of early interdiction happens. Does it happen 1,800 miles away? No. And so your question should be directed at somebody who's been doing this, maybe Pete Hegseth, but I don't understand why this issue has become military before it was Coast Guard. And my understanding is the Coast Guard is kind of in a secondary role. And so I think we have a situation where we have, as I said earlier, I don't think this is about drugs. All right. Great to be here in the foothills.